Hey, this is Chris with Hacking Your Leadership. On today's discussion on employee engagement, I want to go over something that was brought to my attention by one of our listeners after our Monday episode that we just published 3 days ago. We talked a lot about performance reviews and about the tendency for some leaders to use a lot of personality traits in performance reviews as opposed to talking about actual observable behaviors and outcomes that are more objective as opposed to just based on the feeling the leader has about a person. And I had a listener reach out and say that they felt like they owned it. They felt like they were pretty bad at doing this and they wanted to get better, but they didn't really where to start. And they felt like this was impacting the engagement of their team, that they've been given feedback from their team after delivering a performance review that they didn't like that review, or they didn't understand it, or they just felt lost after receiving the review and didn't know how to move forward, or how to make sure that it was better next time. And I like this because I think, when you're talking about what to put in place or what to do to get better at this, if you're not good, or even if you are good, the idea of being able to level check and kind of verify that you are still good at this, because it can get very easy to start writing reviews incorrectly based on personality traits, especially if you're writing a lot of good reviews. I think some leaders really dive into the evidence-based reviews when it comes to writing performance reviews that require a change in behavior from employees, because they need to have kind of their T's crossed and their I's dotted. But when you're writing a very positive review, it can be assumed sometimes that employees won't have a problem with that review that they're getting because it's positive anyway. And so the leader is less likely to have a lot of evidence-based reasons of why the review is positive. And again, that shortchanges the employee. And so I want to kind of, talk to this individual and anybody else who might be feeling the same questions around, the things they can do right now to get better at this and to, make sure that they're, doing right by their employees.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I think it's awesome that people are kind of thinking about this and talking about it. And again, the realization is that almost all of us need some help here to get better at this over time.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why I think it's also so important is because this is a practice that, as you continue to do it, will help you to observe things differently. And even in the informal conversations, like I know right now we're talking about the formality of like a performance review and why this is important as you write it on paper and it stays with the person. But I also think about, the informal times, the conversations that you're having when you're actually observing the behavior in the moment, right? Are you saying something like, "Oh, Chris, like, hey man, I really appreciated your positive attitude today in the meeting, and just the way that you allowed everybody to have a voice."
Sure.
I mean, that sounds good,
Right.
right? You're like, "Oh, yeah, you got it, no problem, anytime, absolutely." Or, right, am I going to say, "Hey, Chris, one of the things that I appreciated about your impact to the meeting this morning, and the fact that we were able to really align on the strategy, was that you created a space where you allowed everyone to share their ideas, and you even took a step back at one point as you saw that somebody was sharing, and then we jumped into something else, and you paused the whole team, and you went back and said, "Well, hold on, let me make sure that you get to finish your thought here, because I want to be sure that we've all had the opportunity to talk through this and share what we're thinking as we get to this point." And that type of leadership in the moment and the observing where people are at, body language and conversations that are happening, that really allowed this to be a space where everyone was very attuned to everyone else and everyone had a chance to talk through their ideas. And that really was extremely helpful in that process.
Yeah, big difference between those
Big
two.
difference. A lot more, right? A lot more, but very specific, based on a behavior, and doing my best, right, in the moment, even to avoid the personality things, because like it's just kind of what we do. But I think that's why this is such an important topic, and I think that I'm sure you'll share a couple things. I'll share a couple things around ways that we can go about sharpening this skill. and ways that we have gone personally around sharpening the skill for ourselves.
I'm not sure if that segue was intentional, but it's a great one to say. We're going to go over that. I want to talk about the things that people can do to actually sharpen this skill, or to if you're starting from a blunt stick on the ground and you have a lot of sharpening to do, then or if you just want to kind of fine tune some things, I want to go over some of those things that you can do right now with your coworkers to get better at this and do right by your people. But first, I want to get a word from one of our sponsors. All right, one of the things that I like to do when it comes to honing this skill and making sure that it's in the right space, especially as I'm approaching, performance review season. And, some organizations, you write them year round because it's based on the anniversary of the employee. Other organizations have a time of year that you write them for all employees. If this is something you do throughout the year because it's based on an employee anniversary, you might already be better at this skill because it's in the front of your mind all the time. If you're in an organization that does this, once a year for every employee, then sometimes it might be harder to get back in the mindset of it, and you have to kind of like relearn this a little bit each time. But one of the things that I love doing is I'll pull old performance reviews out that I've written for people or that were written for me, and I will partner with a coworker that doesn't know the names of these people or doesn't know who they are, pull the names out and have that person read a review back to me that I wrote. And am I left with the feeling that I know, A, what behaviors I should start doing right away that I'm not doing, and what behaviors I should stop doing that I am doing? And lastly, am I clear on why those behaviors led to the outcomes being measured on the performance review? So the company has the goals. These are the goals we're getting towards. This is how I met this goal or didn't meet this goal. And these are the behaviors that I exhibited throughout the year that led to meeting or not meeting this goal. If I'm clear on those things, then it's a good performance review. If I'm not clear on what I need to do going forward, and I just know how that person feels about me, it's not a good performance review.
Yeah, I think it's great. I would almost do something of like when you're in the practice of writing a self-review, I think we get pretty good at this over time, but also sometimes, and I'll be guilty as well, sometimes you write a self-review and it's just like, here's the data, here's the things, here's what went well, basically just here's some information, right? And then and then I'm just waiting to get my review from my direct leader. Like that's kind of a lot of times what we can do here. But this is a great space to say, okay, what are 2 or 3 things, and just let's keep it like timely. In the last maybe 3 months or 6 months, what are 2 or 3 things that were outcomes that you felt really good about? They maybe got recognized for, they were, they exceeded the expectation, maybe they were done, on time or early, but like 2 or 3 things that you feel really good about from a body of work. Write those 3 things down. And then take the time to say, okay, specifically, what behaviors did you do that had the impact on that outcome? What did you do? And just even if you have to list them, you don't have to make it all pretty, but then list those behaviors down. Now, write the review for yourself as if you were your boss, right? Use that information and write yourself a review as if you were the boss. And then what does that look like? How does that feel? What's different? Now that you have that, go back and review. Both review your own self-reviews and review previous reviews that maybe you've received and look to see what the differences are. Right. And I think if you go about doing it that way, you're going to build in some practice with some things, some behaviors that are really easy for you to remember, things that are personal, things that are, that you clearly know that you did. But I think just the act of writing them out this way will be helpful as you start to think about others. And it's probably going to have you think about, when you write reviews, how you get information from people in that review. Because that's the first thing I'm thinking of is like, what questions am I asking my leaders to get the specific details of behaviors that maybe they did or that were a part of this that maybe I didn't even observe or that I wasn't aware of, but are definitely a part of, why they either had success or maybe they struggled.
Right. I like this a lot. There's something that someone said to me once, almost like an exercise, and it had nothing to do with leadership, but I thought it was kind of a fun exercise. They asked me to describe the color blue without giving examples of things that are blue. And I thought that's interesting. And it's interesting how some things are really hard, if not impossible, to describe without just giving examples of it. And if you're thinking about the things you're writing about people, on a performance review specifically, you need to go into it with that mindset of, if you can't describe it, then you shouldn't write it. It's the difference between telling somebody that they're nice versus telling them that they made their team feel appreciated by giving them credit publicly on the hard work that they did and complimenting them in that way. One leaves a person feeling complimented, but the other leaves a person knowing exactly what they did so they can replicate it in the future because it had a positive outcome on what the team was looking for. And if you're doing it in this way, if you think about it from a standpoint of, can a person actually replicate the behaviors because they know what they were, or can they stop the behaviors because they know what they were that didn't get them the outcomes, then that is a good performance review. And if they can't do those things, then you need to rewrite the performance review until they are able to do those things very clearly. They can look back on the review throughout the year to kind of level set themselves on the things they should be focusing on and working on when the review is not clear in their mind because you just gave it to them. Thank you all for joining us in this episode about employee engagement. We'll see you next Thursday for the next one. You have a great day.